All right, well, thank you all for coming out. Um, Today is going to be a bit interactive, a little bit. We're not dancing or anything, but uh, there will be, today I want it to be a little bit more of a kind of a question and answer and a dialogue between us. Some presentation, but I think you'll see why. So let me start off with a couple of questions, and folks can just kind of like raise your hand for this round, or if you got a clarifying question, don't be afraid to just raise your hand, pop off with the question. So my first question to all of you: are any of you presently in a cooperative of any kind? Okay. Are any of you presently in a trade union? Okay. Are any of you in any form of like worker center or worker organizing projects? Okay. Uh, are any of you involved in any kind of local food production? What's the, part of a food co-op? Okay. Okay, a couple of folks. Are any of you actively involved in mutual aid work, however you define it? Okay. How many of you live in one of the 5 boroughs? Most people here. Okay. So, a lot of you are in some formal type of organized work relative to economic production of one kind or another. Are you in dialogue with each other? Say more.
I think aware of some things some of my friends and colleagues are involved in, but likely unaware of other projects and initiatives.
I think much of it is performative dialogue.
Performative dialogue. Okay. Uh, you're jumping ahead. That's good. So, why? If you don't mind me asking, why? And be real. Be real as you want to be.
I'll try to show some restraint.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know where to begin. I think some of it's ego driven. It feels good to be in the space. Some people, like, it's too personalized, and it's not a clear goal or mission beyond, oh, I'm here and I feel good and I'm doing this. No real call to action. It's circular conversation. I feel like Rome is burning, everything's burning. I think it's go time. At a certain point, enough study, enough reflection, enough piecemeal has been done. It's time for some people in opposite bold force as the thing that we're needing to talk about. Thanks for listening.
No, thank you. Thank you. So that got to one of the central points of the argument that we're trying to make here with this build and fight formula. And just in short, let me just say off the top, part of the premise of this is that we actually have enough people doing enough solidarity work that we could be making not only a material impact in this society, but a political one. We are not. And we need to interrogate why we are not, right? And part of that is the connective tissue is weak, or in some places non-existent, or I would say even further still, kind of lacks what was stated, and I'm sorry I didn't get everybody's names. But one of the central points that resonates with me very heavily is, oftentimes outside of immediate relief or immediate kind of consumption needs, there is no broader set of objectives to our mutual aid work or our, food security or even if it's aiming towards food sovereignty. It's piecemeal, and I'm not saying per se it's ego driven because a lot of it is actually need driven. But we really have to be real that I think we oftentimes lack the imagination and therefore lack the political will to see our capacity to actually act to scale. And that's premised a lot of reasons on subjective aspects of bad social interactions or unhealthy social interactions or power dynamics, that aren't directly confronted or when confronted don't resolve themselves easily or healthily. So it's not like there aren't per se reasons that some of this connective tissue isn't there. But I would argue one of the biggest things is the left lacks imagination, right? And part of that imagination is because we have to be real, I would argue, we are not counter-socializing. And that our logic and our assumptions are kind of rooted in, when you really look at it, a kind of belief that the market is actually going to take care of our needs. And we just need to struggle and reform, tweak things here or there to make them better in terms of how they are distributed. And how many of us actually think about, what would it take to feed 20,000 people, right? House, that many people, clothe that many people, provide child care and health care and elderly care, right? Tend to the disabled. Because I think there's a dynamic, particularly in a, empire such as this, that so much of that is just done, we believe, like for us. And somebody else abstractly is handling that. So it only becomes an issue for many of us when it doesn't work, or it doesn't work either the way it's supposed to, or is the way they claimed it's supposed to work, or it doesn't deliver on the things, in an equitable and a just manner, and then it's a problem. But for the most part, we just kind of remove that from our thoughts. And that's a problem. That's a problem, because if we want to live in a world that is not defined by capitalist social relationships and commodity production and commodity relations, we have to take an active role in undoing those relationships and creating a new set of relationships, that actually serve people's needs. So we actually have to be participants in doing that, because there's nobody else is going to magically adjust that or change that. We're going to have to do that. So that piece around is, I know a little bit about New York. And, in truth, y'all are sitting in the largest cooperative solidarity economy framework damn near in the world. When you actually look, I know CNAC has a good little map that they're developing. When you actually look at all the different projects that are known, and there's probably a lot more that are unknown, particularly in underground kind of communities, migrant communities, or communities facing different forms of precarity that have to create systems out of necessity, which wouldn't go on that map. So if you add that as a layer to what we already kind of know, which is like, more formal, this is extensive, but it lacks any coherent power because it's not coordinated. Now, mind you, it's not easy to coordinate a couple of million people. So I'm not bemoaning the task per se, or trying to imply that folks are bullshitting or something like that. We ain't got a couple of blocks in Brooklyn is more people than all of Jackson combined. But part of the piece, I think, is, we have to build a connective tissue, and we have to build a connective tissue that actually serves a broader purpose, a broader set of goals and objectives. So if you don't walk away with anything from anything I say, that would be kind of a main point. And then the critical piece is, well, where do we want to go with this, right? And how do we engage in a broader kind of political program and dialogue, to do that? And part of what, our assumption is very clearly, is to say that we already got enough people who are doing, particular things on this side of the equation, right? We got to get out of this deficit thinking of like, we don't have enough, right? Or there's not enough people involved. Part of what I was just asking you was kind of demonstrating now, there's actually thousands of people, probably tens of thousands of people involved in doing this on a day-to-day basis, all of these things. And particularly in New York, like if you add in like the trade union aspect, I think union density is something like 25% in New York, if I remember correctly, maybe even higher, right? So this is not a place that's not in any formal sense, it's not unorganized. It's not like, if you just look at that sector, they got resources, right? But resources are being deployed to do what, per se, right? Other than protecting their members and increasing their wages and making sure that they're safe at work and the work conditions are fine, what's the broader goal or mission these days, right? So if we want a different economy and a different social reality, there actually has to be a politic that pushes for that. That can't be just left to kind of chance. We got to be in some dialogue about that. Now, the piece of what's here, and this is intended to be this kind of formula, it's intended to be somewhat sequential, or like things that, not necessarily like 1, 2, 3 order, don't mean it like that, but like building blocks. And like why mutual aid is up there, number one, like we, within that, try to use a broader definition of that term, right? So it doesn't mean like the formal, per se, mutual aid of, we set up, a food kitchen and we're cooking and we're somebody's bringing food or somebody's bringing medical aid and we're distributing and engaging the community. We're trying to use it in this broader sense of what we've learned or what that means in our context, for instance, in Jackson, and I would argue some of this exists everywhere. And the broader definition of that is like in a place like Jackson, Mississippi, where the real unemployment is close to like 50%, permanent real unemployment, right? People cannot survive there without extensive networks of solidarity and exchange. You just can't make it, right? Everything from child care to people providing rides to those who may be fortunate enough to have a job, to get to work. Because we don't have a public transportation system. I mean, if you come to Jackson, you might see a bus every other day or something like that. But in reality, we don't really have a public transportation system. And the geographic expanse of our place is such that if you got a job, your job is probably 5 miles away from where you live. There's not like where we are. There's no extensive like bodegas on every corner. Like, there may be an acre between one house and the next house, or half an acre. So you either gonna walk and be in good shape, or you're gonna get in the car and drive around. And most people, unfortunately, drive around, right? So, it's an environment wherein people have to share out of necessity to make ends meet. And then there's different informal codes of, interacting and exchange so people don't get exploited within that concept. And of course, there's struggles. It's very dependent on women's labor, in a number of different ways, how this works and how it, plays out. So it's not, totally, balanced in many, regards. And we have, just to give you a real picture, we have a kind of a dynamic in Jackson, which is very much like global South type economies and countries in regards to most people who are between, let's say, like the ages of 25 and 55 They don't live in Jackson. They live elsewhere, and their parents are taking care of their children. And so how a lot of people also, live is like they send basically, I'm gonna use the international term, they send remittances back to home to their parents, in this case the grandparents, to pay for the kids, right? And so we got like this inverted bell curve. There's a fair amount of young people, and even that's declining. Our city is rapidly declining in population, like particularly since the pandemic, since the water crisis. And for those of you who are not familiar, Jackson has a very acute water crisis. We're not like Flint, so folks will be clear. Like Flint has a problem with its source. Its source primarily is unhealthy. Our problem is the source is actually great. It's the delivery system, which is old, antiquated, and was built on old lead pipes. They got installed like 150 years ago, right? And then there's an actual kind of climactic or geographic dimension to our water problem. Is Jackson basically is an infield on top of a concave volcano, oddly enough. So where a large part of Mississippi is actually over an extinct volcano, and so there's just been like millions and millions of years, hundreds of millions of years of clay infill from the Mississippi River that has just built what you see, right? But it's a particular type of Yazoo clay is what we call it, that if you go like more than typically you dig about 6 feet deep, about 6 inches deep, you're gonna run into this, thick kind of clay, like orangey brownish clay thing that's really tasteful, oddly enough. But I wouldn't eat it per se, but all the time. But you could, but a little bit. But like we are one of these places that you really learn, if you're paying enough attention, if you care to, like how much of what we are doing in this so-called civilization is predicated upon 6 inches of topsoil, which if you don't treat right, we ain't gonna be here much longer, right? So Mississippi is rich, but it's a richness that only goes so deep, right? And if you go beyond that, you're like, oh, we in trouble, because it takes, what does it take, 100 years, to create new topsoil? The process of fermentation, and we deplete it, typically every 2 years, with a lot of the cash crops that we produce. So there's a lot of clocks ticking on us because of how we are actually trying to maintain all this, which is not sustainable, and another way things have to be done. So this is my way of bringing into this formula a critical analysis, around why we have to not only think about the climate, but the overall ecology, and why it's really necessitates us doing something different, profoundly different than what's being done now, in terms of how we are, producing and reproducing ourselves, if we want our species to remain. Now, if we don't really give a shit, then hey, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Just keep partying like it's 1999, and enjoy it. But if folks going to do that, then I would say, be fair to future generations, and if we need an extended birth strike or something like that, so people don't come into something and like curse us after the fact that we're gone. Like, what the hell did y'all do? And why did y'all do that? So these are some choices that we have to make. But what this little piece is just offering is to say, in the era that we are in, we're not going to like create, I would argue, we're not going to create some kind of like new political party or vanguard party that's going to like solve the issue, right? It's kind of too much water under the bridge for that type of solution. Now that doesn't mean that we don't need political organizations of all types. We're gonna need a lot of them, a lot more of them. But to think that one set of forces is just gonna kind of come with a program and we all gonna magically follow that program and it's gonna lead to something better, nah, that's not how this is gonna work, I would argue. I'm more than open to being argued against because I think it's generative. But I think, there's a premise of we got to kind of start with what people are actually doing and work with some of the frameworks of what people actually believe. And I think the critical piece is like, the good, bad, or indifferent. Basically since the 1990s, most of the left has gone most into a more horizontal way of thinking and doing things. And that has its strengths and it has its weaknesses, right? Like anything. But I would say it is the dominant way in which things are done. So rather than kind of like bucking against that, this formula is like, okay, well, how do we work with that? What's the missing connective tissue? And then what I mean by like starting against a deficit thinking is like, we're kind of like, well, we don't have enough people to do this. We like, our small collective may not have enough people, but if we connected with the collective that's down the road, doing pretty much kind of identical work in this particular region, and they connect, and and we democratically decide, hey, you do this, we do that, y'all have skill to do this, we have skill to do that, we have the resources to do this, you have the resources to do that. Can we connect, plan this all up so that we meet broader needs, right? And iterate and experiment. And that doesn't require anybody to give up their autonomy, right? Or to do things, how they continue, like, how, it doesn't require like, okay, to meet, we set some production goals with each other. It doesn't require like you have to be up working at midnight. You still determine your own workflow and hours within your collective. We just ask you to be accountable. Like if you say you're going to do a particular thing, do your best to do that particular thing so we meet broader collective aims and objectives, and we can come and meet in the middle and then distribute, what we do both to each other and into the broader network of people, that we want to be involved with. But the hard part is going to be, I think, is us coming up with goals. That's going to be the hard part. Where are we trying to go with this? And I believe, I'm one of these organizers, I believe, you put your best idea forward and you put it out there for people to accept or reject or debate, right? And just because I'm like, hey, this is what I believe and this is, I'm one of the people, I try to write out detailed plans. Like I'm not trying to impose upon you. I want to come with the sharpest thing possible that my little brain is capable of doing. I'm presenting to you so that it can be collectively interrogated, added on to, broken down, accepted, rejected, and we build from there, right? Not like this is it and that's the only way it's going to be. It's like, for us to sharpen things up. And I think there's a couple of things that we need to be very mindful of that we would put out there. Is number one, to think that we could just have all of what capitalism has done, exploiting hydrocarbons, and we're just going to distribute it better, and that's going to work, I would argue is a dangerous fallacy. A very dangerous fallacy. And some people would, there's a political term that some people don't like. I like it, about degrowth and all of the different principles that are enshrined with it. And the reason, let me say why I like it, because I think it's one of those terms that's going to be hard for the capitalists to appropriate, right? Because the very term goes against the whole premise of their being, which is like, they're going to grow to, they think they're going to be on Mars soon. They're wrong, but that's going to be a lot harder than they think. But it just shows you the fact that they are thinking that and planning on that, just shows you the absurdity of what they're thinking and doing, and how callous they are about their command over the resources that they have appropriated from all of us. So, like the next time you hear about Jeff Bezos, going to the moon, just recognize he ain't talking about you going. There's nobody in this room who's going to be on Jeff Bezos' moon colony. He ain't talking about you, right? He's talking about what he can extract from you to get him and his little crew up there. But he ain't talking about you. So since he ain't talking about you, he ain't talking about none of us, that's a point of solidarity that we should have of like, let's make sure that that moon colony don't ever get off the ground. Right? Yeah, like that, you're not taking one further resource to get that going anywhere. And that's a backdoor way of creating a political goal and objective, right? So it's like if you think that you could terraform the moon, I'm borrowing from Neil on this. If y'all think y'all can make another planet like Earth, then you can make Earth again. Like that don't make no sense what you're talking about. But what it exposes is how deeply they are committed to shit remaining the same. Like we're not changing anything, and since we're not changing anything, we know the course of what we are doing is going to lead to the destruction of this planet. But since I own it, I think I can, treat it disposably. But I'm saying this and making this argument to just the absurdity of what they are thinking, but I want to get us to divest more from little aspects of how we think, which replicate, what they are doing, right? Which we got to catch, right? Because that means in every single way, we're gonna have to think about how we relate to energy differently, which then means we're gonna have to think about how we house differently. We're gonna have to think about how we do transportation differently. We're gonna have to think about how we do healthcare differently, how we produce medicines differently, right? And in the service of who, and the service of what, right? So like one little piece means all of it has to change, but if we're serious about, future generations being here, then there's another form of both urgency and agency that we're gonna have to take. And I'm gonna stop and just open it up more to questions. But just to go through what these pieces are really about. Like I said, the mutual aid is to think about that in the broad sense of what people are doing. Mm-hmm.
First of all, thank you. This is just like, I really appreciate what you said about reimagining and we need to rethink things. I think you particularly talked about the left. And I often think about ancestors in my family who were captive, enslaved, who dared to imagine freedom, when freedom's not in sight.
Right.
So I really appreciate that. It has to be reimagined. It has to be rethought, transportation, all of it. Because I feel like in some spaces I'm in, I've got out of those spaces, context is missing. So I want to ask you two questions. How do we get at real context? Because when you said 50% permanent unemployment, I almost walked out. What? That right there is call to action solidarity. We live in a world of deficit models.
That's right.
Oh, the poverty rate for this group is double that group. Okay, sounds about right. All's well with the world. It's like, how do we really introduce context? Because I feel like until the land is avenged, none of this is gonna, you know what I mean? Colonization, rape and pillage, racism, this stuff just doesn't happen in a vacuum. So how can we get to real context beyond land acknowledgements and that stuff? And my second question is, how do we get out of the status quo, even in our but I've been in these spaces, and it's just like, and then I think about, again, my ancestors, Montgomery bus boycott movement. They didn't know it was going to take that long or whatever. So how do we get out of, because as long as, I'm going to stop here, but it's not like a standoff or a stare-off. Mm-hmm. They're doing the same thing, Still investing in the thing. How much of my lifestyle is still complicit in the thing that I say that I'm against?
A lot.
All of it.
A lot.
Am I still buying stuff from Amazon? That's
right,
not hanging
right.
out, but I digress. But how do we introduce context for real? And how do we get out, particularly with the left? King said the harm of liberals is worse than anything in the world. How do we get out of the status quo? And however you want to, I appreciate however you want to.
Thank you for the real questions. Let me be real and candid. I know I'm gonna probably get myself in trouble now with this video. But on the real, all jokes aside, you know, if you'd asked me that question 4 months ago, it would have been a different answer than what it is now. And why do I say that? One of the most hopeful things, and hope is important, you know, one of the most hopeful things and encouraging things that I've seen in a while was the student protest movement that was, you know, taking place throughout this empire a couple of months ago. You know, it reflects a deep consciousness shift, but kind of like as soon as it emerged, it's almost disappeared, right? And you know what is very clear, but it's hard to talk about. This is, you know, like hard for us to talk about. Because it's being repressed. I mean, and that's the point I want to get to. Because it is being repressed. What's hard to talk about is how, in particular, the liberals and the Democratic Party control political conversation in this country. I'm not saying that tangentially. Let me give you two examples of why I'm saying that, in particular, that I want you to all interrogate and look at. So, 4 years ago, you know, starting basically in the spring of 2020, you know, the George Floyd rebellion, there was things leading up to that, but the George Floyd rebellion led to 3 months of, you know, concentrated mass mobilization, direct action, political organizing in this country. You know, with major kind of occupations in Portland, Seattle, and one of the more critical things, you know, it's had its weaknesses, it's had its faults, but I was happy to see, you know, that that many white people fighting for justice on the premise of a black man being killed. I was like, that's some new shit. That's a critical transformation that's taking place. That's not complete, but like, I didn't think I would see that when I was young. I was like, oh, okay, you know, that's different. You know, like there's something to work with here. You know, and then what killed that? The elections, which was the institution of, you know, stop the mass mobilization, stop the protests, you know, orient this way, you know, time and energy and resources here. We'll get elect us, and we'll mete out more justice. We'll reform the police. We'll tamper down the budgets. You know. You know, we'll administer the COVID vaccines better, and we'll come up with better policies. You know, we'll distribute health care and social benefits for those who are unemployed, you know, better than they did, right? And, you know, homeboy got elected, and that slowly went away. And then he, you know, I'll never forget arguing with some of, you know, some of my friends and comrades who went down that route of supporting him, like when he made his first inaugural speech and made it very clear. I know y'all are talking about reforming the police, but actually the police need more money. He said that. Don't forget that. Like, they need more money, and I'm gonna make sure they get more money. You know, and I remember watching that speech, and I hit, you know, about like 20 people, like, it's your boy. You know, fast forward, here we are now. Not only have they, you know, and what they did with Kamala, even if she don't win, that was a master stroke on their part, And I hope folks are studying. Like I want to encourage everybody to go back and just look at what's happened the last 3 months and how they moved to install Kamala, and then look at all the levers and the process of how they did that, and then ask yourself, if you're gonna vote for her, any of your, that was the most undemocratic shit I'd ever seen in my life. The way that they just installed her. Now, part of it is just, whole pieces, but and this is what people don't want to confront, because people kind of believe to a certain extent, anything that Trump say must be crazy. That's not true, right? He actually winning some points. I can definitely tell you down in my area, right? He's winning some points, but when he says, how did they pull that off? That wasn't democratic. She didn't go through no primary. He's right. That's actually a fact. Now, some of the other shit he might say about canceling Christmas and people eating dogs and cats, that may be crazy. But he's speaking to a crazy that already exists in the society. That's the piece I want y'all to understand. So it's not like he's crazy. He knows that man knows what he's doing. He ain't no dummy, right? He ain't a dummy at all. Right? He knows the media. He was on TV most of our lives in here, and been manipulating and playing it, just like a news anchor, reads a script. He got a script, it may be in his own little twisted head, but he knows what he's doing. You just as a sidebar. But the way that they pulled that together, and then had a conversation about joy in the midst of a genocide. I mean, that was utterly fucking disgusting to me. I can't tell you how to feel or what to think, but that was the greatest, that was the greatest coon shit I'd ever seen in my life. And I mean that. That was really fucked up and disturbing. The way that they paraded that. And then would even let somebody a Palestinian, who they had vetted, who they knew what the talking points was going to be, wouldn't even give them the time of day to be on stage. Right? But then they had a couple of Republicans who, last I checked, were also responsible for the death of a couple of million Iraqis. They had them on stage as part of their coalition. Right? And trying to tell me and you, well, in order to defeat this guy, we need this coalition. I'm like, wait, some of us are old enough to remember, you killed a whole bunch of people. You know what I'm saying? And last I remember, some of the same people in this room saying we need to ally with you. Y'all was calling this man the devil 20 years ago. So when did the devil become an ally? And what does that tell me about you? You know what I'm saying? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold up. So if time gets tough, who's going to get sacrificed? Because that's what that coalition in effect means. And so what I'm saying is to try to make it real and concrete, is that what deeply disturbs me is that, if nothing else, this is the most documented genocide in history. And it is definitely had an impact, particularly on a younger generation's consciousness. That's without question, I think is happening. But the degree that we are even sitting in this room right now, and every indication is that they are going to extend the war, and it's not even a political issue. Now, she may lose, or the Democrats may lose on account of this issue, but that's because, Muslims, Palestinians, Arabs, black folks, allies, and a couple of key states have we ain't messing with you, particularly in Pennsylvania and Michigan. So she might lose on that account. But the fact that she can get away without, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but was it Tuesday and Wednesday? It was two major attacks that happened in Lebanon. I haven't heard them utter one word, either Biden or Kamala, say one thing. I've been on the road, so I've been doing my normal news consumption, but with the networks I'm in, normally somebody would say, well, she said this, and what does that imply? I ain't heard anything. Am I wrong? Ain't said nothing, right? So clearly it's just like, well, we're going to move on. We're going to act like that didn't even happen. And anybody in this country who may be a voter, who may be impacted by that in any personal level, because there's a number of Lebanese folks here in this country. If you just want to limit it to that, no words of condolences. No. We think this is reprehensible, or we need to get back to the negotiating table. They ain't said nothing, right? And then on the reverse side, not just gonna put it on their end. Donald Trump talking about running around targeting Haitians with some of the most outlandish claims I've ever heard. I mean, there's no political cost. None. And it's been proven that like it was totally made up. They done went back and got all the source. A couple of little right-wing groups made it up. It got amplified, did all this. They even know the source. No political cost at all. Like his ratings ain't went down at all the polls, not once. That's not a reflection on Trump. That's a reflection on this society. So to me, I'm like looking at to people like, this should be a moment of clarity. Unfortunately, I don't think it may become one. I hope it becomes one. But it's a moment of clarity that at least in my organizing, trying to convince folks is like, don't neither one of these forces give a shit about you. Period. At all. So, why? Like, I don't even want people like, who you gonna vote for? I'm not even in that debate. I don't care. I'm gonna get screwed either way it go. One be maybe more immediate applied pressure, but the other one is, right now, just, I want folks to pay attention to, going back to this Trump example. The Biden administration is shutting down information news sources all over the world and the country right now, alleging that they're doing election interference because they are tied to, allegedly tied to Russian news agency funding and sources. And they're going to put, 3 people that I know personally, in prison. I don't know if y'all are aware of it. You haven't heard of the Uhuru 3? Look up the Uhuru 3. There's other people also, more than just those 3, but look up the Uhuru 3. That's where most of the information is. And at best, they just finished their trial and they found that they said, they weren't Russian agents, but they were conspiring to be Russian agents, right? And the evidence is they talked bad about U.S. imperialism and they took a trip that apparently some Russian agency paid for. Last I checked, most academics go to different places. Some people have to go to places like a conflict zone, or some places somebody don't, this government may agree with one week, disagree with the next. So by that criteria, it's a whole bunch of people in here that the Democrats can I'm gonna shut you down and give you 5 years in prison tomorrow. Because it's completely at their whim. But they talk, well, why? They're spreading false media that can impact the elections. Going back to what I said, they know where the lie came from about the dogs, cats, and the geese. That's not election interference. And then he gets to keep touting what is clearly known as a lie. That's not election interference. So like the subjectivity of what they want to do and what they're doing, we need to be very clear. And I'm giving folks a warning, like the Democrats are already actively punishing forces of the left, to their left. That's not nothing new, but I'm just saying like this is actively going on now by them. So this argument like they're gonna create more democratic space, like stop lying. Don't lie to people. They're not gonna create no more democratic space. They're gonna create space for them to run their program. That's it. Like if we want space, that means we got to fight and take it. Point blank, period. Like they, like they don't provide that, and that's part of I think our historical memory, right? This whole notion about human rights and all of that only exists because enslaved people in particular fought back against the shit that they was trying to impose, and they had to negotiate. So then they come up with this fictitious thing that there's these rights, that they don't even, it's like to make themselves good on paper, they don't have no intention of applying, right? Or selectively applying at best. So, I mean, the going back to your question, I initially thought, I was hoping that the sheer brutality that people were going to be witness to would alter and shift consciousness in this country more than it has. And I'm digging myself just as an individual of like, okay, we got all this and it's well documented. You can go on any YouTube or any, Instagram, whatever, and if you chose to look, it's right there, for you to see. And this society is still for the main functioning as if nothing has changed. Nothing is going on. And so that piece around the counter socialization, like I'm serious about that because I think, unfortunately the creature comforts of this system have most people so inured that, until it directly impacts me, I really don't give a shit. And that is, I think, a bottom line that we have to deal with. Now, the piece about Jackson is and I think the piece that we got to concentrate on, this system doesn't work for the vast majority of people in it. So the subjective factor of, are we sufficiently organized to engage those people and present an alternative and be in relationship with people enough that they, begin to believe in themselves and in what we are doing, I think that's the challenge. Because one of the things I can tell you about Mississippi that I love, that the conditions produce on a certain level, and I know it may sound fucked up, but I don't have to convince most people in Mississippi that they are oppressed. Like they're like, that's very clear. I tell me what I don't know, right? And our challenge is, that makes I'm from LA originally, and there's always a convincing that, to an element of convincing people. I ain't got to convince nobody in Mississippi about, there's something bad going on here. Like we already know. I have to convince them that we can do something about it. So it's a different challenge, right? And it's more of a challenge of like, yeah, I know it's bad, but is this really going to change anything? So it's a different piece where like the consistency, the relationship, how we engage is far more important. And why there's a certain level of stick to it, like and how for us, like the biggest thing I would say for us, drawing from our example, is to tell people like what I think we got to be, don't be afraid of failure. How we embrace failure, I think, is the most critical thing. And what the 10 years that Cooperation Jackson's been around, we failed more than we've succeeded. But the point is, how do you learn from each failure? Hopefully you're learning to improve. So like a couple of projects like, we did that, was explaining to somebody, we did that 2 times and it failed. We're doing it now a 3rd time. But we done learn from each time, like, okay, we made this mistake. This was too premature. We didn't talk to enough people. We didn't set the table properly. We had a whole bunch of assumptions that, I'll give you one. So one of the things that we have been aiming for and trying to do is find an autonomous way to resource ourselves, drawing from the community, the resources in the community, and knowing that so much of what we understand as capital is actually just fictitious circulation of value, right? What people consider to be value. Like, okay, if we can tap into that and create our own system of belief and circulation of value based upon our own activities, like we draw upon a certain wealth of at least being able to tap into people's labor and creative energy, because they know they're going to get some of their basic needs met through a medium of exchange that we set up through mutual aid work and exchange systems. So we're going to keep trying this until we get it right. I don't know however many times it fails, right? We're going to keep doing it, and we're getting better at each time. But one of the first times we did it, this is 2016, we were looking at doing it. We kind of made some assumption that because a mayor or a candidate, one of our comrades was running for mayor, and we knew he was going to win, and that we had a majority city council that would back something like this, that we could go to all the retail stores, and based on that political kind of power, and we thought a certain level of municipal support, that we could go to them and say, hey, we want to create this local alternative currency to be able to use within this network. Would y'all be willing to engage in it? And they laughed at us. Every single building, like every single retail store is like, are you serious? Like, no, get the hell out of our store. And one of the things we kind of recognized there was like, we should have went number one to mom and pops, because their bread is buttered actually in the community. Target is a multinational corporation, which doesn't necessarily require it to even make a profit in Jackson, rather than just have a market share in Jackson. So it operates off a different scale and a different logic. So they were like, we don't need you in Jackson to actually succeed. That's not what we need. Where somebody, the local moms and pops, like, is this going to bring in more customers? Right? Is this going to actually help my business? I'll consider it. Let's try it. Let's do it. So it's like you gotta. We learned that. It's something we should have known, granted, but we learned that the kind of hard way of like, oh, wait a minute, yeah. This is who's actually dependent upon the relationships here. So we started with some bad assumptions, but the good part, like we engaged in a practice which exposed our bad assumptions. That wasn't guesswork. That was organizing work. And so from the organizing work, we learned, and then like we had to come back and sit down, engage in criticism, reflection. Hey, blah blah blah, and we finally do an assessment. Like that was stupid. That was just dumb. Like we should have known, not have wasted our time going to talk to them, and then But it was a good piece of like, oh, this municipal power is not all it's cracked up to be. It's got limits, right? It's got limits.
I'm asking this also around Palestine, because we've been in the streets, we've gotten arrested, we've called our officials, we've gone to DC, we've lobbied our officials, and some of us are getting now into more local electoral politics. And is, from where you're sitting, from the lessons from Jackson, is that, I know that shouldn't be the only focus, but if we see that, if the goal is to stop sending weapons, right? How do we now use that as an organizing tool? Like I'm trying to convince, the Mumba Bandeli to run against Hakeem Jeffries. He keeps saying no.
He's gonna keep telling you no. Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, kind of like your thoughts at this moment around kind of the value or what we can do around electoral politics, if there is any.
Yes, there's value in it. If Chokwe Sr. had lived and implemented some things, it would be a different set of lessons. Completely, I can say that wholeheartedly. But I don't want nobody to walk away with an illusion that it would have having Chokwe would have changed everything. no, so don't take that away. If he had been in office and moved this program that we were trying to move, we would just have more data, to be quite frank with you, and that's good, don't take it like, so, again, like not accomplishing everything that we want to accomplish, it's frustrating, but I hope we develop a level of political maturity and enough systems to like why this is an actual long-term intergenerational struggle, and like how we pass the baton to be like, okay, this is what we thought was possible in our time and context. This is what we were able to do. These are the tasks that still remain, and there's now some new challenges for things that have emerged in response to what we've done, right? So, and to a degree, I think trying to be like how we take the lessons. So I think some of the things from Antar didn't pick some of that up, like in fairness to him, because he saw the reaction. And I think it was kind of, I can't speak for him. I don't, like this is just my own external assessment. But I think part of it had to do with, I don't think we're prepared to deal with that backlash. I disagree, but like if we trying to be mature and real, it's like, okay, you made the choices you made based on your assessment. I may not agree with the assessment, but I at least need to understand it, right, to be able to kind of negotiate with it, right? And so I think part of that came down to that. The who sits in these seats is important, but it's only important to the extent that there's a social movement that's willing to hold anybody accountable, even our friends, right? And hopefully we learn how to do it in a way, when they are our friends that produces some results. Let me put it that way, right? But we also need to be real about once you sit in those offices, it does change you, right? And I would put like anybody who's the closest thing to it would probably be like a nonprofit organization. And anybody who's been like a director of a nonprofit organization, you start to run up into some contradictions real quick, right? About, like one, I'll cite for myself, being a director of one. There's my politics and my principles, and then there's the federal law statute, and I don't want to go to prison for violating this set of principles because I'd rather be out here doing something else. So that means oftentimes you can't spend money that way. So I got to tell you no, right? And there better be a receipt for everything that you did, right? That goes against the broader democratic principle of trust. Let's just put it out there. Like, the very nature of the institution, it sets up a certain set of practices which go against political principles that we had. That's the nature of what it's set up to do. So that we have to say like, okay, I have this institution, I have this thing, and be very clear with ourselves and the others. This thing exists to do this. There's another set of things that we need to do. This is not it. This is not going to do that, right? So what can the nonprofit do? Our nonprofit can hold land. Our nonprofit could pay a couple of people a salary to do some co-ops. Is it going to actually lead the revolution? Absolutely fucking not. It's not, no. We can make a contribution towards educating people. We can make a contribution towards putting certain things in position. But that's it. Beyond that, you need another set of organizations and institutions to move that forward. This is not it. And don't have no illusion that it's going to be it, right? So that's what, to me, where I get dogmatic with some folks like, we want to create this revolutionary nonprofit. That's a contradiction in terms. You can't, no, that's not going to happen. Be clear about what this thing can do. And that's the same thing with government. Be clear about what municipal government can do and can't do. Right? Now, New York City is actually not a municipal government. It's a damn empire, but unto itself. But I think it's just like, are we clear about what we want to do? So if he was to run in that office, what are the 2 or 3 things that, you know, the forces who helped to put him there, like, we gonna make sure you do these two things to the best of your ability. And we gonna do all the different things to give cover and political agency to move that. And then you gonna have to, you know, the nature that, I see your hand, the nature of dealing with that is, how do we then deal with all of the contradictions that he might have to deal with? And this is something for me, I've had to come and be like, all right, you know, I was expecting too much of maybe some of the people we put in there, when it's like, we was only supposed to move 2 or 3 things within that venue. And that's it. And then there's a whole bunch of other things, like we don't have the power to stop them from doing what they're doing. They may have to make some compromises here and there. Can we live with them compromises? And that's a real question that the movement has to answer. And unfortunately, we don't have enough dialogue where we often can answer those, you know, critically enough. That's the reality.
So I'm wondering about mutual aid in an environment of scarcity. You talk about the 50% unemployment rate in Mississippi. So clearly, if anyone's getting anything done there, it's without very many resources. The people who I have around me currently who are willing to engage in mutual aid, also, we ain't got shit. So I'm wondering if you could sort of shed some light on how to go about developing a meaningful system of mutual aid, despite the fact that we don't have any resources.
I would say, number one, we have more than we think, always, right? But I think oftentimes, you know, we think about what we individually bring to the table, and you kind of got to start with an accounting like that. But then, like, what is the aggregate of, once we put all that together, what does it lead up to? Then there's the piece of like, well, how are we actually going to make decisions about this limited piece? Then I think that the magic is, what can we do to make whatever we have generative? That means to produce something else, which then gets us into another set of how we see ourselves as producers rather than just consumers or users. And that's a big struggle that we are in. Like, this is one of the things I'm being very dogmatic with our people for right now. So to give an example, to try to make it concrete. So that system I was talking about, us trying to create this broader circulation of value. You know, we were working, I'm not gonna name the organization, but we were and to a extent still are working with like I guess it's kind of like a foundation. They're trying to figure out what they want to be. But, you know, they brought some resources to the table. They had a set of objectives that, you know, that we thought aligned with us. About, you know, y'all got some technical expertise and some training that we can kind of create some tools that will facilitate, you know, through an app that will facilitate people in our community being able to, like, you know, I can do childcare, you know, in exchange for a meal, or I can do X, Y, and Z, right? And match that up. Because part of what we want to do is, you know, like how most of the mutual aid that I was talking about works, it works within kinship or association networks. And if I don't know you, you're not my relative, or to a certain extent, that's the limit to where it goes. So we like, how do we extend that, right? How do we create, you know, a process and a communicative network that we could at least do certain things that go beyond me knowing you? But we got to still create, like, if it's childcare, like I got to know I can trust you with my child, right? I'm just not going to, just because you offer don't mean I'm going to take it, per se. So there's all those different things that we try to set up. One of the interesting things that happened was, you know, in a process that we did to kind of figure out, well, how do we create this system? The first concrete thing that folks decided that they wanted to do, the vast majority of the people that was in this meeting, said, we're going to do this really, really free markets. And I was sitting there like, okay, you know, from my own personal subjective, that's not where we want to go. But this is what the people want to do. Start with what the people want to do and build from there. So it's like, my piece is like, okay, this is good. I see. This is good. You know, let's start with this. But now I need to, you know, let's put some questions out to challenge us. So my question started with just, you know, let's grab everything from everybody who wants to come in and do this really, really free market. So go to all the grocery stores and every place else and get what they got. And that's kind of worked out to an extent. But now the political challenge is getting folks to see, you know, what happens if Costco don't want to give us nothing next week? What happens if, Rouse's don't want to give us no food, X, Y, and Z, right? So it's like trying to get our people like, okay, the nature of how this is set up is dependent upon other people giving us their surplus. And that's basically charity, right? And so we're saying like, let's keep exhausting that. Let's put political pressure on them and moral pressure on them on a particular way. But the challenge that we are now doing is at each one of these markets, the initial challenge was, what could all of us create? What can we all create that we're gonna bring to the market? Because the objective is now give people like, no, we actually have to produce ourselves so that we can sustain this, and we bring what we produce to this new exchange system that's solely determined upon us, our energy, and our resources that we do collectively. And it's starting to work. People are like now getting like, oh, we shouldn't be dependent. It's not bad to ask them, because we know they actually, they have stole a bunch of surplus that needs to be given back to the community. So we're gonna keep asking them. But the piece is like, we're not gonna be dependent. And it may be years before we get to that point, but there's a critical shift of getting folks to be like, I know how to knit, or I know how to fix a car, I can offer this service. That part is starting to take over. And so I think there's a piece like within our mutual aid, like going back to that, like a critical adjustment of like, yes, we have a little, but together we have a lot. And if we put our skills together, we can have even more. But that's going to lead us to ultimately it's going to lead to other fights. And that's what I'm trying to get at on a person's objective is, I want to have the bigger fight, right? I want to get us to a point of saying, we don't have enough land to produce enough food. The city does. The state does. Why don't we go take it? But we got to build up people's, I can go say that right now and it sounds crazy. But if we got, 200 farmers, like and the people who are down, in a relationship with them around that food, making that demand, that's a different set of political power. I want to get to that point. But it's recognizing we got to organize the mutual aid and to start to infuse the production with it to build up that power and capacity. And that's the piece to me. I mean, I could go more, but I want to get to some other questions. But I hope that was helpful about like how it's a building block and why that was number one. Like it's a building block. Because one of the critical pieces about mutual aid, like one of the old socialist problems, was like what they call the calculation problem, not having enough real information around what people need. If we are doing our mutual aid right and we are actually, in relationship with people on a constant day-to-day basis and ascertain what they really need and what they really want, then we start being able to produce for what people need and get ourselves out of commodity production, right? First on a local level with the things that we directly control. That's why that community production is up there. Like we got to shift our own thinking about who we are and what we bring to the table. So like I don't mind producing. I just don't mind producing for, the Toyota or whoever the hell is, right? But I want to use my skills in the benefit of humanity. I believe most people want to do that, right? But we're prisoner to having to do that on I do this for an hourly wage as opposed to meeting the need. So how do we start shifting that on the local level? That's part of what this whole thing is about, to go first. So I saw one here and then back there.
Yeah, so thank you for being here and talking to us. I know you're a really busy person. My question is kind of located in counterinsurgency, damage control, and self-defense. So I kind of wanted to go back to what we were saying about the George Floyd protests. I mean, those being, I think, like the biggest mass mobilizations we've seen in this country. So going into the counterinsurgency point, like we went from that and the kind of call to defund the police on a national level to then electing Eric Adams and potentially Kamala Harris, two cops, into big seats of power, and a massive investment into police budgets and an acceleration of the construction of cop cities in every major state. We went from having security forces in unmarked vans shooting, unarmed peaceful protesters in a lot of cases, specifically targeting journalists and medics, like the Israelis do. I'm just thinking about how, so many people were out in the streets doing that, and then now people are polling that tens of millions of Americans are supporting the deportation of like so-called illegal migrants now. So that's like the counterinsurgency element. And then just thinking about the connective tissue that you spoke about before, like let's say this all gets some momentum, that's where the self-defense part comes in. How do we then defend that? Because I saw your podcast episode recently a couple days ago with Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, where you kind of spoke on that, and you brought up Gerald Horne's book. So I was just wondering if you could maybe elaborate on that in this climate of increased repression. And then just also adding really quick, like the left in this country has typically only really survived when it has an internationalist focus. But how do we have that focus when people like Uhuru 3 and Julian Assange, who are kind of connected at that international level and bringing attention to these issues, are so easily isolated from the masses of people and getting their message out? So I guess just self-defense in the context of all that.
I'm hesitating because a lot of that requires time. And being totally subjective, we've wasted 3 years. Being real with you, we wasted 3 years, at least from my perspective. I put it that way. I tried to put out a piece in 2020, the part of what that show was based around, like, a more domestic repression was coming. Was the argument I was baking in. And like, what are some of the things we need to start doing now to get ready? Because of insufficient organization, I think it just wound up being like pissing in the wind, to be honest with you. I know a couple of people read it, but we're not in no, outside of a couple of local areas, I don't know if anybody's doing anything. I hope they are. I don't know, right? And some of that I should know. You got to do what you need to do on your level. So I'm hoping that you're doing that. But it's a question which is coming up now. It's like you got 50 days before that election, and this thing could break in a totally different way than what anybody kind of plans and anticipates. And there could be a tremendous amount of political violence. I think there will be, particularly if, I put it this way, like if Trump loses, I expect there to be immediate violence, right? If Trump wins, I expect it to be delayed violence. But it's going to come either way, right? They'd already promised that, when the man gets up there and says, I'm your retribution, he means that, right? On a personal level, you can see that one's real to him. Like, if I get back, some of y'all gonna pay. He mean that. So it's coming. And what scares me the most and why I reacted that way, I'm trying to be measured with what I say. And why I'm trying to be measured, not to like tone anything down, but at the end of the day, even though I disagree profoundly with some of our comrades who are like, we got to do everything that we can to support Kamala, whatever the situation is. At the end of the day, I know I'm gonna still have to work with you even despite this disagreement. So let's not make it so unbearable to each other that we mad about what one of us have said. But this is the challenge that I'm putting out to them and to everybody. Like, what you're asking, with the folks who are supporting the Democratic Party, I want you to be real about what you're asking us to do. You're asking us to put her in office and to put them in office to defend against the proposition of violence from even more rabid right-wing forces, from a state apparatus which is already committing wanton violence against us, and then most of these cop cities are in places where Democrats control. So to me, I'm like, I can't take the position. Let me measure my word. I can't take the position that the Democrats are going to offer any form of security, or because I'm like, the forces that y'all are saying that is going to provide the security are all of the ones that are already killing black folks. That don't make no damn sense. Like, why they don't? I don't trust them now. Why would I trust them to protect me against, a right-wing militia? Right? What interest do they have in protecting me against a right-wing militia when half of them may be in some militia shit them damn selves, or wish they could be? Like, so it don't make no sense. And it's like you're making an argument which is an excuse for you organizing. That part I am dead serious about. Like, we have self-defense is our responsibility. That is not something we should be leaving to the state at all. I'm just be serious with all of y'all. Like, that is foolish. Like, that's asking my enemy to protect me. That's literally what it is. I'm like, nah, I'm not trusting, I don't trust you like I don't trust you now. No, I can't do that. But it's hard in our context, let's be real, because this state, the United States of America, I hope people really realize this is one of the most repressive societies in the world. We are able to have this conversation because the very fact that if we so choose, they can lock my ass up in 5 minutes, disappear me, and y'all would never know. That's how good they are at what they do. That's how far-reaching are what they do when they really put their mind to it. Palestine, if nothing else, should teach you the limits and extent to which they're willing to go if they really feel pressed or challenged. They will wipe you the fuck out. Right? So it's hard, but it has to be done. And I think the piece that we have to now figure out is how do we do a level of self-defense, which is about mass training people and how to communicate, how to share, how to plan, how to prep, within the bounds of what is legal now, which may change. Don't suspect that what's legal now is going to remain legal in the future. I will warn you, it's not. But while you have the time, use it, right? And be real about using it. And the only answer I can give, and I'm probably willing to give here, is self-defense has to be primary. Take the time and energy to do it, and do not rely on believing that any apparatus of this state is actually going to be a defense against us and the more reactionary forces. And going back to 2020, right? And Kyle Rittenhour and all that stuff. The police were right there, on the scene, the whole time, right? In force, in numbers, and allow that whole scene basically go down. And that wasn't the only case. There was a couple of cases in Arizona where they shot and killed a couple of Chicano and some indigenous folks in open air, and the police was sitting right across the street, right, letting these militias be there. They are not our friends. So whatever we do, we in our interests, we got to do it for ourselves.
Thank you for coming visiting New York. I'd like to ask you about the media and all this. So we talked about the role and limits of nonprofits, municipal governments, charity. I want to ask specifically about the role or limits of media, local and national media, in building a new context. I'm specifically thinking about, I was able to visit Jackson last year and visit Cooperation Jackson and see the land, the properties that you are liberating in a sense, right? Even the shopping center, you just liberate. But I'm not seeing coverage of that locally.
You're not.
Or nationally. And I'm wondering, is that strategic on your part, or is it intentional, or is there a deficiency there that should be addressed?
On a local level, they basically just ignore. So to be clear, that's intentional. We know them. right?
They quote you in stories about other things, but not about other things.
That's not just singular to us. There's a whole set of things that they're just not going to cover. The dominant thing with all three of the major news media pieces, particularly since the pandemic, they have a concerted program on all three of the major networks of destroying Antar's administration. And anything similar to it or adjacent to it, they are and that includes us, they are intentional on destroying. So if you just, look at, basically at this point today, 5 days a week is something that Anton did right, and how, and so that there's a concerted effort from the local media bosses that they want to undermine any vestige of black autonomy in Jackson. That is the stated objective of their owners, point blank. So they're not going to report on anything remotely positive at all, right? Whether almost whoever does it. So that's the local mainstream media's monopoly and its political agenda. And that's been very concentrated and very deliberate. And it's aided in, so Jackson has recently been each year they strip more and more of the autonomy from the municipal government, right? And in each year we get a couple of months heads up, like how the cycle works, so folks understand. So the state legislature meets in Jackson basically from January to April, and then they may extend the session to May, even into June for different reasons. But it's basically that 4 month period. But they start setting the agendas, and you start to get to know what the agenda items are, typically starting in September, of what the different state legislatures and forces, nonprofits, whoever, are going to try to put on the agenda to be what we're going to vote on, start voting on in January, right? And most of the votes take place in March and April. And they go through all their committees and all that legislative stuff. But you start getting a heads up on who's setting the agenda, at least from the ruling class elements, typically starting in July. When the news cycle starts about there's a problem with the water, or there's too much crime, or blah, blah, blah. And then once you start seeing it, like they did a show about this last week, they did a show about it this week, they got it. And then by October, you'll see here's an agenda item that's being proposed, like we need more cameras or we need more police. But they give you the heads up on what they're going to do, for a Q follow. Like that's our local cycle. Every place, every city has a similar cycle. That's just the timeline for ours. And so, yeah, since 2019, they just been like, nah, we going to get rid of this. We're going to eliminate this. And the issue right now, kind of like in Jackson, is like who wants to preside over a shrinking, resource depraved, place where there's clearly no respite. Like we don't have the city don't have no idea about how we're gonna fix the water crisis. None, right? There's no federal money coming in on to deal with it, and the state definitely is not gonna deal with it. So it's like we're just gonna be in a perpetual peace. But in the context of that, they get to blame black incompetence or create stories about black incompetence and mismanagement and all this other kind of stuff. And what that furthers is we're going to strip you of another autonomy and another autonomy and another autonomy. This is the hardcore 5-year cycle that we've been in. So they're not going to cover us. We don't cry or complain about that. What we do, is, we try to be very aggressive on social media. We try to be, we are now working, with Black Liberation Media to kind of do our own show. We just, to answer some of your question, we just brought on a project that we're doing with Rosa Clemente to kind of be more of a national, international mouthpiece for us to get stories out, to tell more stories about a radical, kind of solidarity economy orientation to push, some of this. So we've seen it as a deficiency, and we're trying to address it, but there's also a piece of being very selective about who we talk to. I know I am. I get probably every 2 or 3 months, I get a request from Fox, come on and talk about that. The hell no. I'm not going to be on, no, it don't serve my purpose. It just makes me look like a wild man or something, to serve their particular narrative. So it's like, I'm going to stick with what I control, however, build our base over time of an audience that's reflective of our politics and worldview and values. And if that's slow, it's slow. That's a choice that we've made very deliberately, though. So there's one here and then here.
So, tying back to what you were saying about or the conversation about the two-party system.
Uh-huh.
Specifically then in regards to third-party candidates, and I've just noticed a lot of people who've started to have that kind of like social consciousness sort of still funnel their energy and like these attempts to build like mutual aid and like and in various manifestations of that, but that energy is being funneled towards trying to elect a candidate, even if they recognize that like it might not work, or it's like probably not. So then, like, how do you find the people there in that kind of place? How do you sort of think that we could start fueling that energy and helping them channel that towards the immediate like, practicing and preparing in the moment?
There's no substitute for just a grind of the work. I'm gonna be honest, there isn't. All that other stuff, it may help, but it's just a flash in the pan, right? And, because of how we're socialized, like what PSL or what the Green Party doing in Cornell Wells, it has I think it has value in helping to reach people while they are listening to put forth ideas. So I'm not going to poo-poo it, but I'm very clear. That is not going to take away from what I got to do on the day-to-day level, and what we're trying to get our organizers and folks in to do is like, our thing is to be constant, be constant. And that's a challenge unto itself, trust me, right? But there is no substitute for that, none. I hope people can disavow yourself of that illusion, right? And if they bring more people in an episodic way, great. Then we have to figure out realistically when people come in, how do we keep them, right? Because that goes in cycles and waves of people's interest waxes and wanes. Enthusiasm's up and down. Those are part of the cycles. But our core has to be like, this is the grind. I'm gonna be doing this grind 10 years, 20 years, whatever. This is what we got to do, and there is no substitute for that. Yep, we're close.
Since then, as you say, domestically, the ruling class has propped up Kamala to really dull this level of confrontation that was happening in the summer. And then internationally, they've really been pivoting to Asia, particularly to China, continuing the vilification of North Korea and Russia, to paint this enemy that we can share as quote-unquote Americans. They're expanding NATO in the Pacific. They even wanted to open a NATO office in Japan. They're out there in the waters, and they're really elevating their nuclear capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, again, creating this enemy to justify whatever they're going to do. And Kamala's saying, I'm going to make sure we have the most lethal military. So I guess what's your assessment of the Civil War now, when they're doing so much and successfully to point the energy elsewhere?
One faction is doing that, not the other faction. I think that we are, I think basically, yeah, we're right on time for a blow up. And I think one side is trying to mitigate that, which is the for lack of a better term, the Democrats are trying to mitigate against that. And, I think what they are, what it's very clear that the undertow of what the Democrats are trying to do through Kamala and building this broad coalition, with the likes of Dick Cheney and all these other folks is we need to regroup, reconsolidate around a core imperialist project and focus on the external enemies. And in order to focus on the external threats, we need to quiet down this domestic threat. Trump and his forces being a domestic threat, which is why all these old, warmongers and war hawks are lining up with Kamala, right? I hope y'all remember Dick Cheney's actual history and, what he did and what he was about. And he's got no contradiction with like, oh, you say you want to make the most lethal fight? I'm with that. I can align with that. And I'm going to help you discipline this kind of rogue agent, if at all possible, to keep us on track with, maintaining global hegemony. So there's a faction which is trying to unite around that. And on that level, Trump is a wild card. Him and the forces that he's aligned with on the level around the empire, they unite on all the fundamentals of capitalism. Don't get it twisted, right? Trump and them, or they unite on that private property, all that. But they really don't know what he would do on the Ukraine. They really don't. And to a certain extent, I don't think they really would know what he would do. It's not really clear if he's really going to support Israel in the way people think he would support Israel. I think Netanyahu is betting at 100% that he would. And I would argue what Netanyahu is trying to ensure that Trump wins. That's what the last couple of days in part have been about, right? And why they are being silent. They're like, okay, this cat is acting as a royal agent now. We don't, the dog is, biting its own tail at this point, and they not clear, and Netanyahu's playing his position well. I mean, very well. It's evil, but he's playing it well. In a while, I said what I mean by, to be clear, Trump's orientation to NATO is, if y'all don't pay, I'm not gonna play. Y'all gonna pay me. So what's in it for the United States? We've been footing the bill, doing all this. Why should we continue to do that? And it's not me. This is what come out the man's actual mouth consistently, right? And if y'all don't pay, then I'm gonna let Russia do what it want to do. I'm fine with that. I don't, less expense for us. He may do the same thing for Israel, because if he applies that same thinking, he may sit there and look. Wait, when he get in, we spending how much money? We sending y'all X, Y. What we getting out of it? That same logic may crop up. What we getting out of this? Wait a minute, hold up. I'm not gonna keep sending you a whole bunch of bombs. Now, if you want to kill them all, I'm fine with that, but do it with your own money. Do it with your own resources. And Israel can't do that. So that's a wild card for them on a certain level. And I think he's politically and ideologically committed to Palestinian genocide. Don't get it twisted. If he could get rid of folks, he would. Ain't no question about that. But is he gonna pay for it from how he views things and his affection? That's not clear. So, but I want folks to be like, there's too much focus, Jamie, I think. Let me say this, there's too much focus on Trump. And the fascists don't need Trump. I hope y'all understand that. They do not need Trump to move their agenda. And in some ways, he's actually interrupted their agenda. To be clear, they have been making advances on a state level, state by state by state, before Trump came into office. They are very close to doing that constitutional convention. They did that without him. He wasn't in the picture. He wasn't in the strategy, right? He was not the player. He done came in and hijacked something. I think hope folks understand what Trump kind of actually represents. Like they were moving, right? And if you go look at some of the stuff like with the Koch brothers, the Koch brothers are the folks who financed that whole movement against Obama and all that birther stuff. He just got in on it, but that wasn't his money, right? And that wasn't his animus for all that stuff, that the Tea Party and all that stuff that happened. That was their money. And then remember when he came in, they broke. They was like, whoa, 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 whoa. We didn't want, like we had somebody in mind, but it wasn't you, right? It wasn't you. And they got a study, I'm talking about on the real objective, who the force is. They got beef. And so they initially they was thinking, well, they were giving all this money to DeSantis and that didn't work out. They haven't put their money into the game behind Trump. So, and that's just one force. There's others, they're not all on the same page. But, what is clear with forces like McConnell and, forces like DeSantis and some of them, they were like, okay, he's provided some momentum. Let's try to ride this momentum. But him trying to supplant Trump had to do with that faction of, the fascists wanting a more palatable and a better, marketable candidate, which I bet you they're wishing they had now against Kamala, badly. Because DeSantis would beat Kamala. I'm sorry to say that. There's a whole bunch of he would beat Kamala if he just ran his mouth a little bit better. But what I mean by the stuff around the Civil War to make it practical, why I still think they're fully on track. So the couple of days ago they claimed there was another assassination attempt on Trump. Hyped it all up, right? All right, that is what it is. DeSantis said that Florida was going to do an investigation, its own investigation. Do y'all know what that means? Think about what that really means. If he's serious with it, what that really means. Fuck the federal government is what it really means. That's an secessionist move. It's slight, it's subtle, but I don't trust the FBI. That's number one. We don't trust them. They're untrustworthy. They're politically biased. They didn't protect the man X, Y, and Z. And we're gonna do something. I'm gonna make a statement about something I have no authority to do. No authority to do. That was in California. He ain't got no jurisdiction, according to how the federal government set up and the state government. He ain't got no jurisdiction to do anything in California. So California government can tell you no, you can't. And if y'all send somebody here, we will arrest them because you have no authority to be here. That is a federal issue. But it's one of these things of how the fascists like him are testing the limits of no, we are going to assert more and more state sovereignty in every single little bitty way, right? And they've already done a whole bunch of things when you go back and look at Texas and Biden. Basically, on a certain level, this is where the subjective is important in history. Texas is in complete violation of federal law around the border right now. Do y'all realize that? Complete violation around federal law. And they letting it happen. Because he's like, okay, we don't, if we push the contradiction and clamp down, it serves a narrative that the federal government is dominating us and pushing us around, blah, 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 blah. So his calculus is, I'm gonna kind of let it go. And then what they do come back, okay, well, what we'll do, since we can't beat them, let's join them. So let's create a whole set of policies, which are basically Trump policies. Let's put it in a package, get them to implement it. Because I was like, they did it at the last minute to kind of steal some thunder from him running on the issue because everybody knew he was going to run on it. But they then got all the Democrats fundamentally aligned with saying, we are going to implement a mass deportation program in order to maintain the imperial presidency. Right? And so how this empire moves steadily towards fascism they don't really need him to move in that way. And so to me, it's like there's so much focus on Trump, as opposed to what does capitalism actually need to function right now? The system itself on a local, national, and international level. And because of the serious decline in the rate of profit that has been going on the last 30 years all over the globe, some places do a little bit better here and there, whatever, but the general system has been in a collapse, and it's like not a total collapse clearly, but we are living in a profound shift of how capitalism actually functions. And typically when these shifts happen on a major level, you have international wars, as there's a new, sorting out of who's going to be the top dog. And right now, everybody knows in this room and everybody knows the world, it's a showdown between the United States and China. It's just a question of when is the battle going to actually happen and on a whose terms. China's trying to delay that fight as long as it can. That's what BRICS is about and all that kind of stuff. They trying to delay it. Delay. But they know it's coming. Chinese are not dumb at all. And as far as, don't buy into is it the most democratic society? No, but neither is this one, right? So don't buy into that hype. The difference is the Chinese actually, it's not that they totally consolidated. There's a lot of debate in China for anybody who really pays attention or cares to. They have a plan. That's the difference. Other than controlling shit, the United States don't have no plan. And what do I mean by that? The only agency that takes climate change seriously is the U.S. military. Period. That's it. But they all aware, the insurance companies and capitalists won't even insure houses no more. So the system is already at a clear advantage, like, yeah, this ain't working. This is, you can build there, but good luck to you. We're not going to insure it. You can, build that house over that hill, but it's going to burn down. I'm not insuring that, not in California no more, not up in this zone. Good luck to you. But the way in which it's already acting, like if one of the things you probably have heard me say, and I'll say it again, like a lot of our comrades is like, what is our program? What are we going to do? Like if a Kamala wins, what are we going to do? I'm offering this. Like, can we work on this? We ain't all got to be in the same party. This is, and this is not perfect by no stretch of the imagination. But let's actually have a vision and program that we, some of which we already doing, right? All of us are doing in some fashion, but how we coordinate. And what keeps us from coordination is to me, it feels like too many of us are hedging bets. Like, if Kamala wins, then we get some more time to do X, Y, and Z. Like, actually, I need you to get down with me now. Like we needed to work on the self-defense. I was asking you to do that with me 3 years ago, and you were ignoring me or didn't think you was serious. Now here we are, 3 years later, right? We not coordinated. We not in communication with each other, right? If you come running to us because we got a few things in Jackson, we might be able to help, but we could have helped a lot more if we would have planned this out together, had some resources done, had some capacity done, come train more people. Like we'd be in a different ball game. But so my argument with a lot of folks in preparation for civil war is like, who was it? Angela put out her endorsement of Kamala saying we'll open up more space. I'm serious. What we're gonna do the next 4 years we didn't do the last 4 years? I'm dead serious about it. That's a real question I got for everybody. What we gonna do the next 4 years that we haven't already done? But they moving their program. The fascists are moving their program. And whether Trump wins or not, they are still going to advance. And to a certain extent, it may offer them more room to accelerate their program. And that part I don't think people are doing. Like, you just to think the federal government, again, like Kamala's going to stop them from advancing. They not controlling Texas now. They not controlling Florida now, on a certain level. And they clearly prepared to break. And Florida, like the place like Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, a couple other states, there's not enough of a social movement set of forces that exist in those states that can beat back their consolidation of the forces that are in power. So if they want to break, there is nothing internally that is sufficient enough to stop them from breaking. So then what does that mean in terms of a geographic sense of like what we are trying to talking about us, what we are trying to do. And I know that some people quietly and some open like, well, why y'all doing this stuff in Vermont? Because I want to live. I'm very clear. We're gonna fight as hard as we can if things get seriously in Jackson, but we're gonna lose. I'm just being real. They'll come burn our ass out in a minute, right? Because we ain't got it like that. It ain't enough, forces. Even the crazy ass little white militias outgun us probably by like 1,000 to 1, right? And it's not like we're not prepared, but they got a historical accumulation over us, right? They got positional accumulation over us. They actually have the institution of the state in terms of the sheriff and the police department. We're not gonna win that fight. We're not alluding to nobody that we would win that fight, right? And particularly since other folks didn't align or federate with us to, like, okay, we basically kind of on our own to a certain extent. That's not what we want to be, but this is the objective reality. So I'm not gonna sit there and lie and be like, yeah, we're gonna fight because we're gonna fight for our lives. But I'm under no illusion that given the weakness of what we got, that we would win an immediate struggle like that. So are we, part of the thing about getting serious, like, are we serious about our own analysis? And I would argue, no, we are not. Because if we are, then we're gonna have to develop a program that reflects us being serious despite our differences.
Wow. I was thinking about what was said about media, what you just said, and self-defense.
Then you, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
We're also at war with information. And media has always, I've been a journalist for like 20 years, just for context. Media has always been complicit in everything you're talking about. And media is also in crisis. I think on average, 2 newspapers close
A week now or something.
And so media deserts. So we live in an information economy now. And so when I think about everything you're saying, and I think about self-defense, I feel like narratives and truth are going to become a level of self-defense.
Yeah,
I wonder if you,
that's right.
Thinking about
That's right.
Elon Musk is going to continue Elon Musking. I look at Instagram, people's pages are getting shut down, content being taken away, shadow banned. People are like, oh, my Instagram. That's not your Instagram. I wonder if you could speak a little bit, because I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, yo, like radios, and I'm thinking about Chicago Defender, and like, creating, which is a good tradition too, our own platforms. I feel like that might be, the revolution's here, and the war's here, but getting information out, whose stories get told and how, like, yeah, I wonder if you could speak to, like, in this practice and position and the writing and the formula, where does ownership of narratives, media, play into that?
Right here.
Ownership, right?
Ownership, our own thing.
Yeah.
And high tech, low tech. So one of the things, that we've been trying to support and give some resources to is the Rebuild newspaper, right? That's intentional. Like, we need our own paper vehicle because we see, they can shut down my Twitter account tomorrow if they want to. Push of a button, it's gone. So I don't control that. That's somebody else. Facebook on that, just my name on it, But the paper, that we can still control, right? We can do some level of our own programming and coding, and we're learning how to do that, and that's part of what we want to do, like create that app I was telling you so we can start doing exchange. So we're thinking about it. We are thinking about it. Yeah, hit me up, Akuno@gmail.com.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question was, I guess, returning to your organizing model, you spoke about like the need for connective tissue, and it seems like that's out of like a strategic impulse, not just like it would be nice to have an umbrella or like a connection between. So could you just speak to like, if you have any ideas on what that would look like, or what sort of the strategic aims would be of that kind of like a connection? And maybe that's in the book, but just was kind of curious to know more about like your imagination around that.
This book hasn't been written yet. That's
Okay.
I'm hopefully we'll be able to start writing it in December. Fingers crossed. Yeah, I mean you're here in New York? Okay, so what I'm hoping, and we are in some level of dialogue with folks like CNAC and some of the other groups here, that their positions can be fortified to extend some of the mapping that they're doing, to take the mapping and then layer that on with creating some volunteer organizing committees from you folks, the folks that's right here in this room, right, and other allies that start being, that connective tissue. Starting with the dialogue, not only about what exists, how do we tap into it, how do we start then having levels of conversation about coordinated planning, work, and activities, right? New York has, y'all are well advanced in ways that I don't, from an outside perspective, I'm envious. I'm like, oh, y'all, I wish we had that, right? And I think somebody like me as an outside ally and irritant be like, can y'all do this? Let me push y'all. Did y'all think about that? And do X, Y, and Z, because you can't tell nobody what to do, but I'm like, let me encourage you to, can y'all ask these questions and do X, Y, and Z and move in this way. So I think, there's more here already, but if you don't have the conversations about what's the ultimate aim, goals, and objectives, and then who and how is going to play what particular roles to connect the dots and facilitate that, that's the next piece that I think I'm hoping New York will be able to make, some advances on here. And then the other piece is the subjective. A lot of people don't like each other, don't want to work with this one, don't want to work with that one. Okay, that's real, right? Figure out how to work around that, right? On the basis of what is needed in New York City to deal with the people in New York City, right? And so there's no magic bullet. It's just, a lot of hardcore grind, organizing. I think the question is, who are some of the people going to take it upon themselves to be that glue and be very clear about who they are? And I think there's one set of folks who, have to be idea generators and movers and shakers. But you're talking about a lot of people who are going to be doing, as I see it, the success of that would take a bunch of people who are going to sacrifice a lot of their time and energy to do a lot of unglorious work that won't be compensated, that won't be recognized, but that will be absolutely necessary for something like that to move. So, we got to stop, basically. No, I need to stop myself because I actually have to get on a train to go to JFK. That's why I don't have much time. But look, I want to thank all of y'all for your questionings, for the questions that you posed, for listening. I think hopefully taking it to heart. Like I said, I had no interest in doing a regular lecture because I just don't think the time necessitates it. I want to work with y'all. On the real. Even though we may never get to know each other personally. That's what my interest ultimately is. So, we're trying to offer this. We didn't go into it in no great detail, but, I was trying to, I'm at the phase of trying to make, this in and of itself could be very abstract. And what I was hoping to do and hopefully came through was through dialogue, talk about how it could really work with the things that already exist. So hopefully they came through. It could always be better and sharper. So folks got feedback from me, don't afraid to hit me up. I'm an avid believer in, criticism, self-criticism. So hit me up, with it, because I'm trying to win. So, hit me up.
I'll make a quick message and close this out. I don't know if I share the same enthusiasm about the city that I live in and its ability to do the organizing that you're talking about.